The easiest answer to that is our sex hormones. Let's just start there. And we have the impact of estrogen and progesterone. And the way I look at them is they're like sisters that come from the same family, but their personalities are vastly different.
Let's talk about oxytocin. This is the one I'm really excited about. I was saying to you in the pre-chat, like no one talks about oxytocin. Let's talk about its relationship with insulin and then how maybe it fluctuates in our menstrual cycle and how we can optimize our oxytocin cadence and secretion.
Yeah, I mean, oxytocin in many ways is thought of as this kind of mother hormone, the hormone that kind of governs all these other hormones in our bodies. And I think it's important for people to understand that when it comes to oxytocin, it's this like nurturing hormone. It's the hormone that I think for many people, they think of as, when a woman is breastfeeding her child and just how bonded you feel. I mean, it's really this bonding hormone and it's complex in a relationship with insulin. It's not the, this complex in a relationship and the understanding that when oxytocin is optimized, your insulin levels are going to be lower, your cortisol levels are going to be lower. And so, finding strategies in our day-to-day life, like insulin is fleeting. So when it's secreted, it doesn't hang around for a long period of time. So I think the joke is that the fact is that you want to evoke stimulating insulin throughout the day, because it's not like it hangs around for hours, it hangs around for minutes. And so the best example I can give you is I have 2 dogs who love lots of affection. And throughout the day, I give them hugs, I rub their ears, I rub their back. And that's good for both of us. It's good for them. It's good for me. Of course, my husband just left for a business trip, but, hugging your spouse, connecting with people that you love, just thinking about something joyful, connecting with your infant. Like when women breastfeed, that's part of that bonding hormone. And so just the acknowledgement that by secreting oxytocin in the body, we are doing a beautiful job of naturally lowering cortisol response. We're lowering insulin as well. And how this can be hugely instrumental. If someone's saying they're stuck, they plateaued, they can't lose weight, I'm always saying like doing something joyful, something that brings you joy is as important as the exercise, the food choices we make, the sleep quality that we make. And I think, unfortunately, because this is less tangible, people choose not to focus on it, but it's actually the hormone. Like when I'm talking to a group of women, it's oftentimes what I start with, because if they understand that, then it opens up a whole new level of possibility for them in terms of finding hormonal balance. I mean, balance is elusive, but finding better balance for them in their current circumstances.
And I think that's so important for women to be chasing or finding joy. Mm-hmm. Like to find what makes you happy. So maybe that is buying yourself some flowers, or maybe it's, buying yourself, some new trainers for your workout, or going for a walk, spending time in nature, getting together, with your friends or whatever it is. I think that that's so important because we are naturally, as women, just in society, we're nurturing and natural caregivers, very much always thinking about, at least, I'm thinking about my role as a mom. Like I'm always thinking about my boys, like what do they need next? Trying to anticipate like when food needs to be ready, the laundry needs to be done. I need to take them to soccer practice, They need to, debrief and tell me about their day, and there's playtime and all that. So I'm always thinking about how I can make their lives better. But sometimes, and I do this all the time, I forget about what makes me happy. I forget about doing the things that make me happy. So, one of the practices that has been really helpful for me, particularly in the pandemic, is I've invested in weights and like more of a home gym so that, the gyms have been closed and stuff. So, to kind of circumvent that challenge. But in the morning, that's my time. Like I wake up before the kids, I go downstairs, I do my hour, and then they're kind of waking up by the time I'm done. And then we have our little morning together. And I think in a really busy woman's schedule, maybe looking at a calendar and saying like, where can I do some joy time? Like, where is my joy? Maybe workout, maybe the exercise doesn't bring you joy. It makes me feel like a beast. So I feel happy, right? Like that's my joy. But maybe someone else, it might be going for a walk, it might be journaling. It might be doing like taking a bath or, whatever it is, giving yourself a mani-pedi, which I did last night. That made me like, I don't know what it is about mani-pedis, Cynthia. They make me feel like I'm winning in life. Like if I can figure awesome. out, so that's my little spiel there on oxytocin and finding some love for you.
But I think it's important. It might be very different for all of us. Like I'm at a stage with teenagers that they need me in different ways. I kind of feel like I'm like the backup quarterback. I was telling my husband that the other night. I was like, it's kind of a weird place to be after being in this yummy years and years and years with boys and having different relationships now as they're teenage young men. One of the things I've been able to do is be able to like spend more time reading. And I'm a gigantic nerd. I love to learn. And so my husband laughs, like some days I'm like, I just want 2 hours to listen to Peter Attia's podcast as an example, so that I can learn about something that maybe will bring greater value to my clients, or maybe it's a book I need to read. And so really finding like it can be as simple as sitting outside and getting sunshine, or giving, honoring your body by being able to find the time to do a manicure and pedicure. I think that's awesome. I just think it's all different for all of us. But I've just come to find out, like, as my kids get older, it definitely starts to shift a little bit. And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing because you have more time to focus on you. That's one of the beautiful things.
Place to be. Yeah.
Strange place. Why do we need to fast like women? Why do you have to fast like a girl and not like a guy? What is the difference? Can you explain to us where the inspiration for the book, but why can't we fast like everybody else?
Yeah. And so the easiest answer to that is our sex hormones. Let's just start there. We've got estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. Yes, men have they have a lot of testosterone. They have, a lot of, or some estrogen, a little tiny bit of progesterone, but it doesn't drive them. Testosterone really drives men. And we have the impact of estrogen and progesterone. And the way I look at them is they're like sisters that come from the same family, but their personalities are vastly different. And so when it comes to fasting, we need to treat them very differently. And as you and I have talked about, we need to treat the way we eat differently when these two hormones come in. We need to treat the way we work out, the way our social calendar. There's so many reasons why these two hormones almost need exact opposite lifestyles. And so when it comes to fasting, that was the whole premise of the book, is let's talk about how those two hormones need to be treated differently. Even though they're both sex hormones, they have major differences in how they like to be treated.
Yeah, I agree with this wholeheartedly. And I love that you've written a book on this as well, because I think one of the things that I've talked about in the past is like men really are like the sun and women are like the moon, right? So men kind of cycle through all of their hormones about every 24 hours or so. Whereas we take a full, give or take a couple of days, we go through a lunar phase almost. So it's like 29, the lunar phase is 29 and a half days. That, of course, is the average menstrual cycle for most women as well. So we kind of go through all of the different permutations, highs and lows of our estrogen, as you're saying, the progesterone, the testosterone, through this 29 or so day cycle.
One thing I've thought about with ovulation is this is really the time that we're going to get a massive surge of testosterone. Like this is our testosterone's like glory moment is in that ovulation window. So do you feel like when testosterone's on the scene, our ability to build muscle is going to be enhanced, or is it going to be more that our craving to build muscle is going to be more enhanced?
That's a really good question. I think with the testosterone and estrogen peaking, what we know is that those are very stimulatory to the motor cortex in the brain. So in some ways, we're like firing on all cylinders, right? So the motor cortex is more activated. So of course, the motor cortex in the brain, for those of you that are maybe unaware, this is the area in the brain that controls movement. Mm-hmm. So you are going to be very well primed to be lifting heavy in this week because of the brain activation, let's say, under the influence of testosterone and estrogen. And to your question around, can you build more muscle because testosterone is surging? I think that there is some truth to that. So, one of the things that we want to do is we want to, in many other areas in our lives, we want to get out of vicious circles. But this is a circle that we kind of want to get into, where it's like the heavier that you lift, the more testosterone is going to be produced as an indirect consequence of having to maintain that muscle. Yep. So I think that the mechanical stimulus of lifting heavy all through the cycle is justified. But in particular this week, because you have that spike in testosterone, potentially your capacity under the influence of having that motor cortex activation for new muscle patterns or heavier or a heavier load is going to be augmented. And you have the energy, right? You're going to have sort of the energy to put towards doing a much more vigorous or rigorous workout. So I think that there is some truth to what you're saying in terms of, because we see testosterone spiking, we can actually go harder at the gym because of the influence that it has in maintaining muscle mass.
Yeah. And one thought I've had, and I've talked to several trainers about this, is that when we look at exercise, we typically look at it in a weekly way. Like you can do three days a week of this, 1 day a week of that. And when you start to look at our hormones, I think women should be looking at this in a monthly basis. And when I look at that 5-day period, there's a part of my hormonal brain that says, well, what if one day you go in and you do biceps, and then the next, and you go hard, like heavy weights, low reps, to your point. The next day you do a bunch of squats. So you're going to really work on glutes and your quads. Next day, you're going to go in on pecs. So you could take that 5 days and really chunk it down into specific body groups and really target them with heavy weights.
What is health optimization for females?
I mean, so first we have to ask ourselves, what is health, right? And what is salitogenesis? So let's just define those really quickly. Health is the ability to adapt and self-manage in the face of adversity. And salitogenesis is literally the process of becoming healthier. And so as a person becomes healthier and more resilient, it has more bioenergetic capacity, more energy to do work, their body can actually bounce back when they get hit with a major stressor. Women and men are just made differently, and we need to accept the differences are real. And one of the biggest differences between men and women is women are largely oxytocin dominant and men are largely vasopressin dominant. So men's biological imperative is to protect the clan and to actually go out and find resources and to actually take care of the group. Women's jobs are actually largely to produce life and to basically be the like we create flourishing, right? Like we create literally when oxytocin is released during pregnancy, it enables the birth process. When oxytocin is released during breastfeeding, it enables the bonding process. So like we are literally designed to like create life, to create connection, and to facilitate the nurturing of the species, because literally oxytocin actually helps build brain functions. Actually, it nourishes the prefrontal cortex. It facilitates social connection, social learning skills. It's super important for pair bonding. It's like we have this, the Taoism is really a fascinating perspective because it actually explains a lot of existence. And there's a lot of polarities in existence, and our polarity is the yin, men's polarity is yang. I do believe we have essentially yin and yang within us. And I think I am more yang dominant female than most women are, because I do have a lot of positive masculine characteristics, but fundamentally I'm a woman, and I'm here to help basically promote human flourishing. And that's really my perspective on health. But women are now in a world where we work and we raise children and we work. And so we have really extensive stressors on our shoulders, and men are in a world where they also work, but men need connection and love, and they need it deeply to flourish as well. And I think what's really a problem in the world right now is there's like this massive sort of patriarchal masculine dominance to culture and society that really emerged around agricultural era. And that has really caused a huge amount of problems, but also honestly, a lot of evolution in the positive direction, but also a lot of problems.
Let's start with some of the sex hormones, because I know that I was saying to you in the pre-chat, lots of clinicians who listen to the show, also lots of women kind of in their perimenopausal, menopausal years that are just trying to figure out what's going on and how to optimize for either the eventual transition to menopause, or if you're already in menopause, like how to optimize where you are. So let's maybe start with androgens, and start maybe with the conversion to androgens. So we have CYP17A1, which is kind of the main, we'll bring that, that's sort of where we bring progesterone conversion into T, or testosterone. when we create testosterone, what are the different fates, let's say, that testosterone has? Like, what are the different potential complications with less than optimal gene expression? And where does testosterone go? And then where can we run awry?
So in that's step one, even understanding that it's not a linear, one size fits all model. We're very unique in the way we metabolize hormones. When we first start, by the way, I should say one thing. The thing that sucks the most in healthcare is female hormone health. We in our research phase, we studied 7,000 people, about half men, half women. And the thing that kept screaming, well, you're supposed to have this problem. It's a gray area. Nobody knows, it's female hormones.
Right.
And we take for granted that infertility, bad menopause, PMS, all these problems are just part of being a woman. Not at all true. What's true is that our metabolic pathways for hormones are a little different. And so the one size fits all certainly does not work. And the endocrine disruptors of food, the chemicals, the et cetera, the birth control pills, everything that's adding a load to us, or I shouldn't include myself that, and to women, the impact is amazing. And I can't believe that every woman doesn't have a Nobel Peace Prize right now for trying to survive the North American healthcare system, because it sucks so bad. But anyways, we're trying to fix it together. So let's work on it. So testosterone, yes, CYP17A1 determines how quickly you convert progesterone into testosterone. So the first step is, how many hormones do I make? What's that bucket look like? Because now you've decided how much you've loaded the gun and what you're going to do with it. So some women have a lot more hormones. They just start off with less. So they're starting off with a problem to begin with. Once you fill that testosterone bucket, you may convert it into, with the CYP19A1 gene, estrogen, right? That's the end of the pathway. You then convert it to estrogen. But before doing that, your body has a few more options depending on what version of these genes you have. CYP3A4 eliminates the clean androgen. So that initial bucket that you filled, before you have the ability to convert it into estrogen, you may get rid of it as a testosterone. And very few women do this, but some do. Right? I would say it's like a 5 to 7% problem. A lot more women, however, convert the testosterone into DHT, SRD5A2. That's the gene that converts your testosterone, converts it into DHT, which is the manly man, Superman version of testosterone, where you can see every ripped muscle and there's no fat. And it also causes other problems like hair, skin, cystic acne, right? Where you can get very specific about why these things are happening. But like another nuance, once you convert it into DHT, there's a gene that in your multiple detox pathways instructs what's called glucuronidation. It's another form of clearance. The UGT genes, there's 2 of them. And that's where you can have a copy number variation. You might not even have the gene. And so you're making this DHT and you also don't get rid of it. There's a young lady in our research phase that came to us who was 22, had her first menstrual cycle at 16, and by the age of 22 had 6 total.
Wow.
1 per year. Her concern was that her acne was so bad that she had to walk everywhere with a rubber donut. She couldn't sit on a chair. Her hair was falling out. She had acne head to toe. She had an amazing ripped 6-pack. Like you could see, it was more like an 8-pack actually, but everything else was falling apart for her. She didn't have the female physique she desired. The breast development was slow, the hips were slow. She didn't have any of the stuff that she wanted. And so all of a sudden, her father, who was an internist, found out she had non-fatty liver issues. And so they put her on some kind of pills. They blamed all this on the pills. They said this is a side effect of the medication you're taking. It's a load on your body. And so you're getting pimples because of toxicity. Your hair is falling out because of toxicity. Inflammation. That's what they blamed it on. In reality, she fueled that testosterone bucket really heavy. So a lot of hormones. She 0 eliminated the testosterone. She 0 converted it into estrogen. She 100% converted it into DHT. And she had both copies of both. She had 0 copies of both glucuronidation genes, so she did not get rid of it. So she was just a hypercharged, androgenized DHT producer.
She was a female with a body that was behaving more male.
Yes. And even that, an alpha male.
Yeah.
Right? She was designed to be Wonder Woman or Superman. That's what she was designed for. And she wasn't using it. She wasn't doing any of that. She just wanted to be what she believed a woman is. So literally it took So again, 16 to 22, had that problem for 6 years. I told you 6 menstrual cycles. It took about 3 months of using food and supplements to up and down regulate certain gene pathways of the ones we already spoke of. And she literally walked into our office crying, saying, it's the first time I feel like a girl. She walked in with her ponytail, beautiful glowing skin, all this stuff. And she felt amazing. And it wasn't a disease. It didn't have there was no what, there was a why. What's the root cause of all of this? And it was just a very exaggerated androgenized profile, which you very, very rarely see. So I spoke about an exaggerated profile because you could be, 0 to 10 on that profile. And from what she's experienced down to something like PCOS or, acne on your cheeks that you just can't get rid of. Or I want to be a little bit curvy, but I just can't. I want to look like, and it could be the opposite. I need to be a little less curvy. Everybody has goals. The trial and error, the one size fits all, I don't think is necessary anymore. What we now understand about genomics and how easy it is to do, you can just read your map and know on day one exactly what you need. It's become that easy.
Yeah. And I think I'm so glad that you brought up PCOS because it's the most common hormonal,
Right.
Issue that we will see with women. I think the latest numbers are like 100 million women worldwide. And that is a number, like 100 million women worldwide dealing with PCOS. And, to your point around the Nobel Peace Prize, there's usually an average when we see some kind of hormonal disruption, there's a huge delta between the time when a woman says, hey, something's wrong. I have 6 menstrual cycles, or my hair's falling out, or I have hair on my chest. I don't think that, or, on my back, or I'm anovulatory or whatever. To the point of diagnosis. Like I think, I know endometriosis is like a mean of like 7 to 8 years before the diagnosis is given. PCOS is similar. It's like 5 to 7 years, something like that. And like, think about what you were doing 5 years ago. That's a long time to be fighting and continually saying, something is wrong. It's not in my head. Something's wrong with me. Like that really does take a toll on the psyche of a woman as well, which is, partially, I'll say, why we do see in these populations with hyperandrogenization with our women, where we see depression and anxiety, and we don't want to talk about depression. Like everyone will say, yeah, I have hair on my chin, or I have we're much more likely, in my experience as a clinician anyway, and I'm sure you can chime in on this with all the cases that you've seen, but people don't want to talk about mental illness. They don't want to talk about depression. We've seen that with the pandemic. We completely ignored it. It was like, let's save every single life. Anyone who gets this, this disease, this COVID or whatever, we're going to sacrifice everyone's mental health to make sure that happens. We're going to isolate people, and I don't mean to go down this tangent, but I will pull myself back in. But what I'm trying to say is that your PCOS patient, if you're a clinician listening to this, is not going to tell you that she's suffering, that she's anxious, and that she's depressed. She will tell you that she's anovulatory. Her cycles she can't get pregnant. She can't stay pregnant. She can't get or maintain a pregnancy. All of these different things that we've been talking about. But I also just want to highlight that some of these mental health issues are also happening in the background. But I think as a society, we're still so ashamed. There's still such a stigma around it as well.
Big taboo. And that's where, when we meet with patients clinically, we have their genome in hand. So we already know what's going on in their head, whether they tell us or not. And when I say that, I'm not saying that this person is an anxiety patient, this person is a depression patient. Why is there such a big mental health wave, like you said, after lockdown, post-COVID? Those people they didn't have a condition. The context drove that out of them.
Correct.
They were flourishing before that. There was no problem. They didn't have depression. They didn't have anxiety. They maybe had little bits of it here and there, but the clinical, I think I need a pill. It's because whatever they're wired for, that optimal environment for their brain, they were no longer in. And all of a sudden they were suffocating their superpowers. Once a woman, which most women do, get deep into their estrogen pathway, they've now converted, and they finish that step 1 sex hormone pathway. What do I actually make? That's what we just kind of covered. The next phase of that is, what metabolite do I convert it into? And this is phase 2 of 3. There's 3 things we got to talk about. So some women, go down the 2-hydroxy pathway, which is great. Clean, healthy stuff, which is what you want to make. CYP1A1 and CYP1A2, those are the genes that convert the estrogen into this pathway. And when I say that, it means that before you have your monthly menstrual cycle, you're converting into this metabolite, and that's actually what you're getting rid of. There's also the 4 and 16-hydroxy pathway, which are toxic. 16 being super toxic. We see it in breast cancer patients. We see it in ovarian cancer. We see it in men that have testicular cancer, right? Super, super potent toxin. And I can't tell you how many women we see that are down the 4-hydroxy pathway. Now, given that, we've established a woman may be estrogen dominant. She just makes a lot more estrogen. We can determine that from the first step. We may establish that she's also estrogen toxic. Well, then step 3, how well does she clear? We have to look at the genes that get rid of this toxic metabolite. And if you're doing really well there, it may not be that big of a deal, right? That's where you can personalize and say, okay, I make this stuff, but the genes that get rid of it, I have the best versions. Not many of us do, right? Not many of us came from an ancestry that required this. So some of the same genes that deal with brain chemicals like COMT, the same GST genes we talked about, the glutathione, the detox genes, plus antioxidative genes like SOD2. These are the multiple things we have to map, which we have mapped. It's very easy to understand in the algorithm. How well do you now clear that potential toxic metabolite that you make? And if you are that woman that is estrogen dominant, estrogen toxic, bad detox pathways, well, there's a red flag. There's not a red flag for this equals 80% chance of something. We don't think that way. We now say, here's your avatar. Here's the bucket you fit in. You're in the estrogen toxic, no clearance bucket. Here's the risks. If you have the wrong environment, nutrition, and lifestyle loads, are you one of those 85% of North American women that was on a birth control pill for 5 to 15 years? Are you one of those North American women that, as she starts to age, immediately starts going on hormone replacement therapy without understanding which one? Not I'm saying not to do it or not, but did you do it right? Right, precise for how the way your body needs it. Are you that woman that doesn't understand hormone disruption and something as simple as a Teflon-coated frying pan, or the chemicals that make your lawn so beautiful, or the cleaning spray on your desktop that you're now breathing in all day long? Are you that woman that's exposed to that stuff? So profile, here's my genes. Here's the load that if they were on the bad profile would push me over the edge, that threshold where my body can't cope. And that's when things like breast cancer, ovarian cancer, crazy menopause, crazy menstrual cycle, pain, can't get out of bed for a week. Why is there so much variability in this thing that women go through? Some women don't even know that their cycle's coming. Some women can't go to work. Why is there a difference? Because the way you make hormones, their toxicity level, and the way you clear them is different. Plus, your environment, nutrition, lifestyle choices are different. The combination of these 3 things is your net result. Right now, you can be very, very predictive and precise about how you're going to feel. And if you fear breast cancer, if you fear Alzheimer's and dementia, if you don't want a crazy menopause, start working on it today. It's very, very easy to do. I can't tell you how many breast cancer patients where we dug into not the what, but why did they get breast cancer? Let the doctor deal with the acute, whether it's surgery or radiation or whatever, but we will go back a few layers to the why and tell you what habits to adopt so it doesn't happen again. Umpteen times we've had to do that.
Can you define for the listener, you've talked about estrogen dominance and toxicity. I just want to make sure that those are clear in the, what is the difference between someone who's estrogen dominant, which we hear a lot. We hear a lot of people, even online experts will say, oh, do you run estrogen dominant? Do you have these symptoms? What is the difference between that and estrogen toxicity?
So in that first pathway we talked about, when you asked me about testosterone, that's the thing we all make. Then what do we do with it? Some women, heavy converted into estrogen. They don't clear the androgen. They don't turn it into DHT.
So this is the aromatization that you're talking about.
Yes. Aromatization, convert it into an estrogen. Big bucket full of estrogen. And there's a gene that tells us how well you do that. And if you have the fast version, this is where you land in. But also we look at the other pieces of the map. So CYP1A1, if you have the fast version, you're converting into estrogen. So you're now estrogen dominant. That's understood sometimes functionally by certain doctors as bad news. But they're not considering that it's bad news for the woman who's also estrogen toxic, right? If you're estrogen isn't a bad thing. It makes your hair beautiful, it makes your skin beautiful. It gives you, it's good for your muscle. It's good for a lot of things, right? But if it's produced into a toxic metabolite, or if you have the wrong hormone disruption exaggerating that estrogen dominance, that's when it's a problem. Right?
Okay.
Even men need estrogen. Men have the exact same genetic pathway that I just described. It's identical. There's no difference. The difference is we do it daily and women do it monthly, and we just happen to lean more towards testosterone. But it's the same pathway. There's no difference.
So when we're looking at some of the so we've aromatized the estrogen, and now we sort of arrive, and you described some of them already, the 2-hydroxy pathway. So now we're sort of at what you might say, it's called hydroxylation, right? So essentially what we're doing now is we're going to add a hydroxy group to the estrogen. We're either going to go down the 2-hydroxy estrogen pathway, which you mentioned is the productive pathway. And I think that we want something like 70% at least of our estrogen or estradiol, estrone to be going down that pathway. And then we have the 4-OH pathway, which, by the way, my body likes this pathway, of course. So in addition to not being able to, and like missing my glutathionization, my body also has a tendency, when I did my profiling with the DNA company, my body likes the 4-OH pathway, which is not the protective pathway. So this is an estrogen agonist, meaning that when you go down this pathway, you are retaining the ability to still activate the estrogen receptor. So think about what that does in the breast tissue, right? It continues cell proliferation because estrogen is anabolic by nature, right? It also shuts down bone resorption rather. Or sorry, pardon me, I said that backwards. So it shuts down bone growth and accentuates breast cell proliferation. So that's just like a recipe for brittle bones and breast cancer if you're not being careful. So from a clinical point of view, let's say, what are some things, because I know that it is possible to jump pathways. Certainly that's been important in my own healing, because I, wrote a book about what we're talking about in terms of being really estrogen dominant, hating my period for years, thinking I was like cursed. So what are some things clinically that we might consider if someone does their test, let's say with a DNA company, and it says, hey, you have a preference for this 4-hydroxyestrogen or estradiol or estrone pathway. What are some of the things that we might do to be able to say, hey, we don't want to go down this proliferative pathway. We want to go down the protective one. What are some things that we might consider?
Sure. So when we answer those questions, we maybe overthink things a little bit, but it becomes perfect, right? And why do I say that? Because there's some women, like I have to ask how old you are, how much do you weigh, et cetera, because when women get into menopause, the activity of 2 versus 4 is a little unique. It can actually be problematic to be down the 2-hydroxy pathway for a short period, right? Only during that phase. And so we try and focus on an answer that solves all the answers. And for us, the easiest thing is, why don't we slow down the estrogen pathway? If you're already estrogen dominant and toxic, that's the combination. We know supplements you can take, simple ingredients that will literally slow that pathway down. And we actually make a product. The one unique thing we did was in the middle of our office, we opened a compounding pharmacy. I think you came and saw it actually.
I did, yeah.
So we literally built a pharmacy in the middle of our office so that we could sit there and compound ingredients, like supplement ingredients, and measure the effect on gene pathways, right? And how the expression changes. And we did this for a number of years with hundreds and hundreds of people. And we came up with these cocktails, and we make something called estrogen E, like estrogen dominant, right? Female E, I should call it, which helps slow down that CYP19A1 pathway. And we also did the same thing on the androgen side. Here's the ingredients that are blocking that conversion. So as opposed to dealing with the disease or the problem, let's go right at the genetic expression level.
How in the last 50 years, testosterone levels in men have declined by 50 or 60%. And the same is true with sperm levels as well. So we're seeing like sperm counts declining. And then when we talk about sperm count, of course, we're not just talking about the number of sperm, but we're talking about the quality of viable sperm. Like we're seeing agglutination, like warped, sperm with double heads or without a tail or, whatever. They're unable to do their intended job. And I've done podcasts before where, I've talked about, men are the seed and women are the soil, right? So we have to protect the seed and we also have to nurture the soil. And so inclusion of seed oils and grains. You mentioned insulin resistance a while back, but we can circle back to it now. Why do you think that we are seeing this declining testosterone in men, or maybe more accurately, an estrogenization of men?
Yeah.
Why do you think that we're seeing that? Or do you have any thoughts on it?
No, well, I do. It's multifaceted. There's another great person who researches this is Dr. Anthony J, who wrote the book Estrogeneration. So it's probably online with Dr. Shanna. I think I heard half of that podcast. I need to finish it, but it's all of modern society. Really, it's all of it's kind of everything. A lot of it has to do with the food, that's the chemicals, it's everything. That's the problem, is that it's everywhere. It's in plastics. I guess most people know about, avoiding certain BPA and all this stuff. It goes way beyond BPA, and it's still everywhere. And yes, they make different versions, and it's like, oh, this is BPA free, but okay, well, what is it? It's just like one molecule off. And these are all leaching estrogen or having estrogen antagonists or testosterone antagonists, all this different stuff that happens in the body, endocrine disrupting chemicals. It's in anything though, even in the lines of can, like the liner of cans, like in the soda can, it has it in the liner to protect it. It's in car interiors. Like if you get a new car, that smell, that is all these chemicals that are in the fabrics and all this stuff that are like off gassing into your body when you get into your hot car. It's in the water. It's in the foods you eat. Soy, particularly soy-based products, have tons of these estrogens. Everything about our society. So, I mean, I don't even know what
I know
to
Sean
really
Baker
do.
likes to call them soy boys, which I think is
So, but it makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like people are headed that way. It's like there is this feminization happening because of the way we live. So the best thing to do, is to start being aware of all of them. And you have to start using different kinds of pans and not using, you don't heat things up in plastic. And hopefully, people know some of this stuff, or you've talked about on other episodes. But one of the biggest things you can do, is change the diet, because what you eat is going to be a huge factor. If you think of the volume of food that goes into your body, that's a big determinant of what happens with your hormones and what happens. Your body has to process all those foods. And so, yes, if you're eating these if you're eating all these like fake soy products and refined grains and all these different seed oils, these all basically are affecting you and your hormones. So the best way to counteract that is to stop eating them. And it actually makes a big difference pretty quickly. And also I'd say men or women too, get out there and lift some heavy weights, like do some exercise. Like there's a lot of good research on boosting, not only avoiding estrogen and different things that will, lower your testosterone, but ways to actively gain and produce more testosterone, like, ancestral living, getting out there, doing things.
And I would say that often the low testosterone rarely has anything to do with the testosterone. Like I had a friend reach out to me recently and was like, okay, my T is like testosterone's low. I'm going to start taking supplementation. Like when should I do it? And I was like, well, why don't we actually let's look at your fasting insulin levels. Let's look at your environment. As you were saying, the EDC, endocrine disrupting chemicals. Let's look at your movement. Like what does your NEAT look like? What's your non-exercise activity therm? How many steps are you getting per day? And you just said lift heavy weights. Yes, when men and women lift heavy shit. Like if you want metabolic health, you're not going to, and for the ladies, you're not going to get bulky. I promise. I lift heavy weights. I'm not bulky. Lifting weights, metabolic health, yes. But the other thing that lifting weights does, which I think is often really underemphasized, is the impact that it has on your mental health and your mental resilience and your ability to do hard things when it's uncomfortable. I realize I'm getting on my soapbox, so I'm gonna step down.
I love it.
I'm gonna step down. But I think that when you face the weights, what's going to be like. I did legs this morning, like destroyed my legs. Like tomorrow, stairs is not going to be a good thing. But I know that helps it helps me do hard things in my business. It helps me as a mother. It helps me as a parent. It helps me in every aspect of my life. because it is, I mean, just like the name suggests, it's training your resistance. And, you know, you have world events like a pandemic where we've seen mental health, like just in the tube. And I think that if we were able to go all in on something, I mean, if there's one thing, hopefully if there's two things you're taking away from this conversation, it's eat meat, at least sometimes, and lift weights, because those, and you know, kind of coming back to this idea of testosterone in men, I often talk about, you know, there's two ways that you build muscle, in the gym and in the kitchen, right? So you build muscle in the gym, you tear apart the muscle, you know, you rip up the fibers, the sarcomeres heal afterwards, but you can also create with a protein bolus like meat. You can also initiate muscle protein synthesis, which is just naturally going to increase your testosterone as a male or a female. Because you require testosterone to maintain those muscles. So with that, okay, I promise I'm done now.
I love it. Just lift weight. It's everything though. It helps you metabolically. It helps you mentally, but it's even just signaling to your body to get bigger, that you're strong, that you're powerful, that boosting testosterone, all this stuff, boosting your confidence, everything about it is good. So we'll leave it at that.
Yeah. I would love for you to expand on, you know, sometimes when you think about, like, why would that be something that we have? Like, why is that a thing? You know, I love to look at things from like an evolutionary perspective. And I think that context here might be important, because the title of your...
Yeah. So let me talk about two things. One is the big picture stuff of what happens it's like a survival switch in evolution. And we'll just talk about all the things that we identified that fructose does. And then I'll explain the biologic mechanism in more detail.
Yes.
Okay. So it turns out that when you eat fructose, as I mentioned, there's a drop in energy and it signals to the animal that it's in trouble. Now, the interesting part is if you eat fructose, you can actually have plenty of storage fat. You're actually okay. But because it drops the ATP, it tricks the body into thinking that it doesn't have enough fat and it wants to put on more fat. Normally, ATP levels are kept at a very, very regulated level. We have a very, very stable amount of ATP in our cells. And if the ATP level goes down, the fat releases, gets metabolized and produces the ATP we need. So normally our ATP levels are great. But what this thing does is when you eat fructose, it prevents the fat from breaking down, while at the same time dropping the ATP. So the body thinks it's not getting enough food, and so it starts eating, you start eating more, and so forth. So the survival switch, is one where first, if you're going to store fat, you want to be hungry. You want to be hungry even if you're eating food. So it stimulates hunger. It does this by causing a thing called leptin resistance. Normally, there's a hormone that when you eat, it turns up, it tells you when you're full. And what happens is this hormone you become resistant to this hormone when you eat fructose. Interestingly, overweight people are also resistant to leptin. So this is actually what's seen in people who are overweight. And fructose absolutely causes this. We showed this several ways. Okay, so fructose makes you hungry. Secondly, fructose makes you thirsty. If you think a soft drink is quenching, it's not. If you drink a soft drink, you will stay thirsty, and it's because sugar actually creates thirst. And I won't go into the detail of it yet, but basically it makes you thirsty. So now fructose is making, even though you're eating calories, you're getting hungry and you're getting thirsty, and you got to go search for the food. So it stimulates foraging, and it works on the brain to actually it increases locomotor activity. So that means you start moving around looking for food. You have to search for food. And so it increases your activity to search for food, and it makes your visual cortex, in your brain pick out food easier. And it gives you visual cues where you will, and it gives you it decreases your willpower to say no, because it wants you to be able to go into dangerous areas to find food. If you're an animal, you have to go out into areas where maybe there's predators. So it creates a little bit of bravery and aggression to be able to go out there, and you can't deliberate. You can't take your time. You have to move, be looking around and trying to figure out what's going on. And so you have to rapidly process things. And so this stimulates this type of behavior. You can show it in imaging of the brain. So you get hungry, you get thirsty, you start searching for food. And then in the body, there's a stimulation of fat production, called what we call lipogenesis. And there's also a blocking of fat, of the burning of fat. So you can't produce the energy from the fat you have. Instead, you're putting more fat in. And at the same time, you become insulin resistant. And actually animals do this when they're preparing for hibernation. They do all this survival thing. They forage, they get hungry, because they've triggered the switch. And when you become insulin resistant, what happens is the glucose in our blood, that molecule of life that Rob Lustig calls, and it really is, it's our main fuel. That's the main fuel for the brain. And if the body thinks that it's in trouble, it wants to keep the glucose available for the brain. And so it does that by preventing the glucose from getting into the muscle. And so it causes insulin resistance. And insulin is required to move glucose into muscle. And so when you become insulin resistant, there's less usage of glucose by the muscle, and so there's more in the blood, and the brain doesn't require insulin as much. And so it can get its share, more than its share of glucose, which is important because you want the brain to get that glucose so that you can be thinking. If you're starving, you don't want to be lightheaded, and because you're going to get into trouble. So basically, it activates this. It raises your blood pressure because it wants to keep the circulation strong. It induces a little bit of inflammation to help fight off infections. It's really there to heighten your ability to survive. So fructose was meant to be a good thing. It was meant to help animals get through the winter when there's no food around. It was meant to help birds be able to migrate across oceans, go thousands of kilometers, where it would not be able to do normally. So by storing all this fat, it provides this energy that you can get and use when there's no food around. So it was really meant to be something. And we, humans, there was a time in our past where it was really important to be able to store fat too. Food was not always available to us. And there were times and we actually have identified periods of time when there were these severe famines that lasted for not 10 years, but hundreds and thousands of years. And when that happened, we actually had mutations occur that allowed us to be more sensitive to sugar. And so we have identified 2 of those mutations. And, as a result of that, we are more sensitive to sugar. And we wanted that because we wanted to be able to store the fat during times of famine. So this is the big picture.
It's interesting, and as part of a diet to lower uric acid, it's something to be considering, as is alcohol as well. And we'll talk about the types of alcohol in just a moment. But the biggest player by far and away is the fructose consumption that is so pervasive amongst humans now. The average uric acid in North America was about 3.5 in the 1920s. Now it's 6, and it has paralleled in lockstep our ever increasing consumption of sugar. So, the average American, I suspect it's the same in Canada, consumes somewhere north of 50 pounds of sugar each year. That's 5 10-pound bowling balls of sugar every single year. And now, we've known that's not a good thing. But we've been focusing for a long time on the fact that it's a glucose load, right? Because table sugar, sucrose, is 50% glucose and 50% fructose. So we really focused on the glucose. Why? Because it's that glucose that stimulates the insulin production. Therefore, high levels of glucose, higher levels of insulin, we become insulin resistant. We develop insulin resistance because we have so much glucose floating around. Next thing you know, we're a diabetic. And we've said, I don't know if we've said it, but it's been said over the years that, well, fructose, because it doesn't use insulin for its metabolism, might be a safer choice. Therefore, let's go all in on the high fructose corn syrup, et cetera. Well, it turns out that fructose indeed is related to the production of insulin resistance and raises blood sugar, blood glucose. So it's anything but a safer sugar. It's in fact even more threatening because it's not just blood sugar that it targets. It also increases blood pressure. And it also directly leads to what we call lipogenesis, the creation of body fat. And, for most people, that's not necessarily what they want to do. So we know now that in North America, more than 60% of the packaged foods in the grocery store have added sweetener. And by and large, these are either high fructose corn syrup or derivatives of high fructose corn syrup, having lots and lots of fructose because it's cheaper and it's sweeter than glucose. So we're really favoring more and more the addition of fructose to our foods and watching these skyrocketing rates of obesity, of hypertension, and certainly diabetes. We know that here in America, there are close to 80 million pre-diabetics and about 34 million already diabetics. So this is about 45% of adults here in America. I'm certain it's the same in Canada or close. That we're talking about 45% are either diabetic or pre-diabetic. We know that 88% of American adults has at least one component of what we call the metabolic syndrome, and that means that only about 1 in 8 adults here is metabolically intact. And I submit that fructose is the biggest player. And now we understand why. It's through this alarm system called uric acid, raising the alarm that winter's coming, make the body fat, raise the blood pressure. So when we target that uric acid and bring it under control by lowering our fructose consumption, for example, increasing our vitamin C, taking nutritional supplements that help to lower uric acid, it's a huge leap forward.
His episode is one of our top 10, has done so well. And we were talking about thyroid function and the ketogenic diet. And and I've seen this as well. And he observed that women who are on a keto, like a kind of a strict ketogenic, classic ketogenic protocol, where it's like 70% or above, fat, and then, kind of moderate protein, about, let's say 20, 25%, and then like the fill is carbs. If you're on that kind of macronutrient split for a long time, it appears like women tend to be a bit more sensitive to, the integrity of their thyroid function, like specifically, upregulating reverse T3. We see, with hypothyroidism, more women tend to be hypothyroid to begin with, which is, of course, just going to decrease the catabolism of cholesterol into bile anyway. So there's kind of this thing that's already happening. And one of the things that I like to do for women who've been in, let's say, doing a classic ketogenic diet, therapeutic metabolic intervention, is then to up the protein. So to kind of play around with the fat protein, instead of going like 70, 20, 10, let's say, maybe it's like 40, 40, 20, maybe, or something like that, 50, 30, 20, something like that, where it's like 50% or 40% fat, 30 or 40% protein. And then like the fill again is carbohydrates, but the carbs are still relatively low. But it seems like that increase in protein, to your point around like prioritizing protein, it seems like that also does seem to be the thing that helps with the female response, like that thyroid, that attenuation in function in their thyroid.
Yeah, I do think that's really interesting. And it does appear that there's a decreased conversion rate of T4 to T3 on a keto diet. the question is, what are the clinical implications of that? I don't know how well that's been studied to see if there are clinical implications, but it's still an interesting observation. And I think you're right that by adding more protein and altering the diet in certain ways, you can probably get around that if it is an issue. But yeah, it's one of the things where, you do have to not just start the keto diet and forget it, right? You, just like anything, it's an intervention for a purpose. So one, you want to make sure you're having the right beneficial effects and make sure you're not having any untoward effects that you want to prevent. So yeah, I think it is important to continue to follow your health no matter what you're doing. That's a simple statement.
One of the other observations I'd love your thoughts on, and this is more with my men, but I saw it. I focus more on women now, but when I was seeing both men and women, I would notice that if they had been on the ketogenic diet for a long time, like a year, 2 years, they were also a little more insulin resistant. Like if we did like a glucose tolerance test, let's say, like an oral glucose tolerance test, we gave them that, like, that really gross, like 75 grams of the whatever, the glucose. Yeah, exactly. They performed really poorly. Whereas if I had given them, let's say, a carbohydrate bolus prior to the test, they performed better.
Oh, absolutely. So that's well observed and written about and understood that that's the case. And I think the interesting thing is, how long do you have to, like, quote unquote, carb up before a glucose tolerance test? I guess the common narrative is 3 days, but there was a study that came out maybe like a year ago that suggested actually 2 weeks. So it's somewhere in that 3 day to 2 week period where if you want to pass your glucose tolerance test, you need to carb up. So then the question is, well, why is that? Like, are you insulin resistant or are you not? And it's more of like a temporary insulin resistance because your body hasn't needed to respond to that amount of glucose or sugar in so long that it's I don't know, what's the word, amorphizing or whatever, like your pancreas goes to sleep, so to speak, or isn't quite as responsive because it's been so long. But as you slowly ramp up your carbs, it wakes right up, and usually then you aren't insulin resistant. So I don't like calling it insulin resistance because insulin resistance suggests like a chronic condition with how you are. But if you're not eating the carbs, it doesn't matter, right? If you're not testing yourself with carbohydrates, then it doesn't matter if your pancreas is slow to respond. Now, where this can come into play, though, is those quote unquote cheat days. If you have sort of regular cheat days, once every week, once every 2 weeks, you're not giving your body the chance to adapt and be able to respond quickly to them, especially if they're high carb cheat days. So you may have higher rises, longer durations of your glucose and your insulin. But the harder question is, at what point does it become detrimental, right? Because again, 1 day a month, probably not a problem. 1 day
and then
a week.
How do you structure them? Is it like a carb up day you're talking about, or are you just doing like a Dom talked about I don't know the correct term, but it was like it was like a ketogenic refeed where he just gave himself more calories, still sticking to the macros. Is that what you mean when you're talking about a cheat day?
No, I'm talking about actually increasing carbs. So
okay, so like a carb refeed.
So
okay,
because and not like a purposeful cheat day, right? Like people look, nobody's perfect, right? So if somebody does slip up sort of on a regular basis and hit the chocolate more than they wanted to, or sample the dessert and get into the ice cream, and the point I'm trying to make is, on a ketogenic diet, that could be more of a concern because of this lack of response from the pancreas when you're consistently in a ketogenic diet. So that's where, if
you should
somebody
squat,
is
you should go and squat.
You should
right. You should have this dessert and then go and
soak up
squat.
that sugar.
Exactly.
Right. Make sure you're soaking up that glucose in some other way. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Or is that the type of person who maybe doesn't need to be on a ketogenic diet, and instead a 75 gram carb diet consistently, focusing on high quality, high fiber carbs, may offset that. So then if you continue to have those days where you slip up or are tempted, you may not have the same dramatic rise. This is all sort of hypothesis, using the data that's out there and trying to bring it together. But that's something to consider with some people if they're having a harder time sticking to and being adherent to a keto diet.
But we often disregard testosterone in women. And, as you were saying, it's involved in, maintenance of our muscle. It's involved in libido. It's involved in mental health and clarity. And when we talk about these, women, in particular, the women that I, because I'm in there, like I'm in my mid 40s. So I have, women in perimenopause that are like, how do you not have hot and how do you, how are you living your life? And so that I can maybe emulate that. What we don't consider for women is the brain effects, let's say, as well as the physical effects that testosterone has in the body. And one of the more natural, of course, you can always have TRT, which is like, still controversial for women, and maybe a separate discussion. But one of the natural ways to improve libido, for women who are in perimenopause, some of the things that I'm often told is like pain during sex, or even at, when testosterone is really low in women, like painful orgasms, like it's very, very uncomfortable for that tissue to contract. So I think it's also really important as a natural means for improving our testosterone levels. And as you're saying, I promise you're not going to turn into the Hulk. Like I competed in figure competitions, before I had my boys. And like my goal was hypertrophy. Like I was like packing on the plates I wanted to get big, and I was working at it several times a week, long hours in the gym. And of course there's outliers. There's going to be some women who are more genetically, let's say, inclined to be able to have that type of morphology. But for 90%, 99% of women, that's not going to happen. And that's part of the lie, I think, that we've been told. Like I love pumping iron. Like I love, but that's not going to be me. I'm never going to look like that.
I'm so glad you said that. So two things. Yes, testosterone is a female hormone, just like it's a male hormone. I'm so glad you said that. Just like estrogen is a male hormone as well. In fact, I have a friend who, he competed as a professional bodybuilder, and through the process used anabolic steroids, got to the point where his body just didn't produce testosterone, had to go on testosterone replacement therapy, was on it, felt better, and then started to feel really, really bad. Couldn't figure out what was going on, felt depressed and whatever, even though he was taking testosterone. Got checked. His estrogen was too low because he was also taking an estrogen blocker, an estradiol. And the doctor's like, you need your estrogen to be higher. So same thing for women. The right balance of testosterone to estrogen is going to make you feel great. No testosterone makes you feel terrible, just like it does in a man, just like no estrogen in a man would make him feel terrible. Now, to what you were saying about building muscle, I'm gonna just hammer that home. Okay, I talked earlier about like if I lived in the NBA and saw everybody there, I'd think everybody was 7 feet tall. Okay, in real life, I'm gonna ask you a question. In real life, forget watching a professional basketball game. I'm talking about you go to the grocery store, you go to the gym, you go to the airport, whatever. How many times in your life have you ever seen someone that's 7 feet tall?
It was one time, and I met Kareem Abdul-Jabbar,
okay,
who is an NBA.
You remember it because it was so rare, right? In your entire life, you saw somebody
just once,
that's 7 feet tall. Okay, that's how rare the muscle building genetics of bodybuilders and female bodybuilders and male bodybuilders are. So, if there's a spectrum, way over here you have musculoskeletal issues, medical issues, like people that have to get treated because they're just not well. And way over here, you have the genetically gifted muscle builders akin to people who are 7 feet tall. Okay, super, super rare. Okay, most everybody is in the middle. Okay, meaning no matter how hard you train, I tell you what, you can even take all the steroids you want. You're not going to look like a professional bodybuilder. That's a true story, right? That's how rare those genetics are. So don't worry about that. In fact, if you are that person with those super rare genetics, you probably don't even work out and you look like you lift a lot of weights all the time, right? That's not you. You can train as hard as you want. You can train like a bodybuilder. You can do it for years and years and years. And what you'll achieve is a sculpted physique, fast metabolism. You'll get the body that you're looking for. You'll get the body that you say, oh, that's what happens when you run a lot. No, that's actually what happens when you lift weights all the time. So, and by the way, let's say, for you're 1 in a billion and you do work out and, oh my gosh, I build muscle really, really fast. Okay. It's not going to happen overnight. I used to have clients tell me this, like, well, what happens if I get too muscular, Sal? So you tell me when you think you're too muscular and then we'll like scale it back. Don't worry about it. We'll just maintain at that point, which, by the way, studies show that the amount of volume and training it takes to build muscle, about 1/9 of that is required to maintain. Here's one of the beauties of resistance training, is maintaining muscle is easy. Building it's a little harder. Maintaining it is quite easy. There's also something called muscle memory, which is a real documented phenomenon, meaning if it takes you a year to build 5 pounds of calorie burning sculpted muscle, and that's a year of consistent training, and then you, for whatever reason, stop working out for 2 or 3 months, and you lose it, you'll gain it back in a month or two. It comes back so much faster than the first time. So training your body through strength training, although there's no such thing as permanent fitness results, it lends itself really well to modern life because most everyday people, even those that are consistent, are going to miss a week if their kids are sick or something happens, or they're going to miss a month or whatever. It's the results stick around much longer and they're easier to come back. So it's just really, really good form of exercise for the context of modern life. It's really, really effective. And you don't need to do a lot of it, by the way. The average person, for what they're looking for, 2 to 3 days a week will get you very far. Like that's it. 2 to 3 days a week, you'll get the metabolism boosting, you'll get the sculpt, you'll get strong, like you'll feel amazing. You don't need to do it all the time to get great result. Now, if you want to, eventually you can, but 2 or 3 days. I mean, I had no clients that I trained more than that. Maybe like a few, and these were people that eventually became trainers. But most people, 2-3 days a week consistent with me, and they were just like so happy with the success they had.
All right. Wasn't that amazing? So if you want to do a deeper dive and learn even more about female hormones and how they impact your mood, your mindset, your metabolism, this video is coming in hot right over here.
This is really the time that we're going to get a massive surge of testosterone. Like testosterone's like glory moment is in that ovulation window.